So today I have a quick story about what is maybe not my most shameful moment as a drummer. There are many contenders for that spot, but definitely one that's up there. And I haven't actually told this story to many people, so let's keep this between you and me. But I'm hoping that this story will lead to a broader and maybe more interesting discussion as well. So the story takes place around 2012 or 2013, and it revolves around a band that I was into at the time called Alt J. And if you're familiar with this band, you might already know where this story is going. But this was right around when their first album had come out and they were starting to gain some traction and get some international attention. And then I had the opportunity to see them kind of in a festival sort of scenario with a bunch of other bands. So I get there, I'm, like I said, familiar with all the songs. They start playing, I'm enjoying it, I'm listening, I'm watching, right? I'm sort of in the back so I can kind of take in the whole scope of the band. And one of the cool things is that their drummer wasn't in the traditional spot in the back. He was sort of over on stage left and turned so that you could see his left-hand side. And I was watching, you know, with my drummer brain, I was kind of picking up on some cool stuff he was doing, like, oh, that's a cool pattern. Saw he had like a left foot kabasa going. I was like, oh, that's cool, left foot kabasa, what an interesting sound. And then the gears kind of started to turn and it all kind of clicked into place at once. He doesn't use cymbals. And by that, I don't mean like he rarely uses cymbals or only uses hi-hats or just a ride. Like there are no hi-hats, no crashes, no ride, no cymbals. And that hit me right when I noticed that, and it all kind of started rushing back all the times I had listened to the album and never noticed that there were no crashes, nothing on a ride, no hi-hats. And as I was watching him, I realized that I was a half hour deep into this performance and hadn't noticed that he doesn't use cymbals. Real quick, I gotta jump in and say that it wasn't like I was completely unaware that he was playing stuff other than cymbals. It was just the sort of thing in my mind where I kind of had this impression that, oh yeah, he just doesn't often use hi-hats and doesn't often use crashes. It just didn't occur to me that he was never, ever, ever using those things. Okay, so as a drummer, this was obviously a little bit deflating or a little bit shameful, which is the point of this story. But I hope the larger point of this story, other than you laughing at how, I don't know, naive or just unobservant I was, I guess, is the fact that they are and were a popular band, and part of, I think, why they gained traction was the uniqueness of their particular sound. And I think a big part of that was percussion and was the way that the drum set was approached by their drummer. And of course, a big part of that is not using cymbals. So just taking, what we take as maybe a fundamental tenet of what constitutes a drum set or what makes up a drum beat. Our right hand is always going to be playing on either the hi-hat, the ride, the crash, something like that. And that's just not the case with this band. There's no crashing on accents. I think most of the time his right hand is leading on a cowbell. It doesn't really sound like a cowbell when you listen to it on the records or when you listen to it live. I think he's got it taped up and he's kind of playing with the tip of the stick on the top of the cowbell. But I think the larger lesson is him being able to rethink what the drum set's role or what his role as a drum set player should or could be in that band. And because of that limitation, which I don't know if it was a conscious decision when they first started playing or how that came about, I'll have to do some research, but whatever prompted that decision, that particular limitation resulted in a band that was able to distinguish themselves and differentiate their sound from, what has been popular and what was popular at the time. And I found this idea of being creative with limits to be very helpful. Oftentimes, if I'm trading fills with students or if I'm working on something myself, I will purposely limit myself or a student and say, okay, let's trade fills, but we can't use toms. Or let's trade fills, but you can only use the bass drum and your left hand, right? And oftentimes you'll come up with more creative things within those limits because all of your typical habits have to now be rethought. So if you're wondering if there's something to be gained from this video, I guess it would be the idea of purposefully limiting yourself for the sake of creativity and seeing what new ideas can emerge when you put yourself in a tighter constraint. Or the point could just be to laugh at me and how ridiculously unobservant I was as a drummer, and I'm sure still am. And then also, I guess the third thing would be to check out Alt-J, just as a cool example of a band and a drummer that doesn't use cymbals. If you know of any bands like that, or any drummers that have particularly unusual setups, or if there are any other drummers out there that just straight up don't use cymbals, I can't think of any others off the top of my head. But if you know of any, please leave a comment below, and if you like the video at all, you can also comment below, or like the video, or subscribe. But with that, I'm going to stop talking and see you in the next one.